So you're a Naughty Dog show like me, huh? Well, you gotta make sure you have a PS3 copy of The Last of Us. You gotta make sure you have a copy of The Last of Us Part 2. You gotta make sure you have a remake of The Last of Us Part 1. Because if you don't have that, well then can you even really call yourself a Naughty Dog show? Oh, and before I forget, you also better freaking have a copy of The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. Because if you don't, again, not really a Naughty Dog show, but if you are, hey, welcome to the club. We're definitely not full of losers here. What's up, you silly buffoons, and welcome to the Asteroid Rants channel, where I talk about shit that I'm passionate about. Today we're going to talk about my over decade-long obsession with The Last of Us series. Now this all started back in 2013 when I saw a playthrough of a YouTuber who I would watch all the time, and he started playing The Last of Us on the PlayStation 3. When I first started watching this playthrough, I was vaguely interested. I had been a Nintendo kid all of my life, and so for me to watch a playthrough of a non-Nintendo game was kind of a different experience for me. But as soon as I started watching those videos, I got hooked on The Last of Us, and after that series finished, I started watching every single playthrough possible on The Last of Us back in 2013. See, being a Nintendo kid, my perspective was pretty different. Back in 2013, most kids were having fun playing their multiplayer shooter games like Black Ops, which was absolutely popping off at the time, especially in the Xbox 360 and the PS3 era. But because my mom never let me play any violent video games, well, I never really had that experience. Growing up, I played games like Mario, Donkey Kong Country. I even played games like Pokemon and other Nintendo franchises like Luigi's Mansion, and I had always had a blast with them. But because I never had any experience with these sort of games, seeing these playthrough for the first time made me have some mixed emotions about the violence, but ultimately the story of The Last of Us was so compelling that I absolutely just knew that one day I wanted to experience it for myself on my own console, which led to Christmas of 2014, where I really wanted a PlayStation 4. And so I had proceeded to ask my mom, hey, can I get a PlayStation 4? Which kind of threw her for a loop because she was pretty used to hearing me talk about Nintendo games and being so passionate about them. And I had the best parents in the world as a child, so they had always treated me right, and they had always bought consoles, Nintendo consoles, and Nintendo video games for me. So to have her hear me ask for a non-Nintendo console was pretty mind-blowing for her. So when Christmas of that year came around, I was really excited. You know, I had woken up early that day, I had slept early that night, but I had those jitters as a child where you know you're just about to wake up to a bunch of awesome presents and you kind of can't go to sleep, but you know you have to because you just gotta wait till the morning to be able to open your presents up. That's kind of the feeling I really had that year. And so when I went to the Christmas tree and I saw a giant box, I was super excited to see that my mom had actually listened to me and that she had gotten me a PlayStation 4. So I went to the Christmas tree, I was like a ravenous dog, and I just went there and I ripped open my present, and what I saw wasn't really what I expected. It was a Wii U, not a PlayStation 4. I was kind of confused at first, and I looked at my mom and I asked, you know, being the ungrateful little child I was like, hey, what's this? And she's like, hey, we thought this was too violent for you, to be honest, so we decided to get you a Wii U instead. And while I was initially disappointed at first, being the little brat that I was still overall happy with the fact that I had gotten a new console at all. I mean, most people don't even get to have new consoles in Christmas time, so the fact that I had gotten a new console at all was pretty awesome. And I was super excited to try out the Wii U and all the experiences it would bring, right? Yeah, the Wii U wasn't as popular as I thought it was. Ultimately, this console ended up being a failure. It only ended up selling like 13.5 million units worldwide, which is pretty fucking bad, not gonna lie. Now, of course, there were a few bangers such as Super Smash Bros. Wii U, Super Smash Bros. On the 3DS, which was coinciding with the release of Super Smash Bros. Wii U. You could use the GameCube control on that game, and of course, it also had games like Super Mario Maker, Splatoon, Xenoblade Chronicles X, one of my absolute favorite games on the Wii U. Nintendo, please bring this to the frickin' Switch. Please, I'm begging you, man. I can't just keep booting up an emulator to try to play this game, okay? It kills me that I can't have this in full HD. Please, Nintendo. So, back to The Last of Us. Because my mom didn't get me a PlayStation 4 that year, I was just kind of stuck for the next few years watching playthroughs over and over again. I didn't really know where else or how else I could experience this. I certainly wasn't going to do this on an emulator because one, I was just too young to really understand what emulators were. They also weren't something I was really aware of at the time. And so until about 2018, I just watched playthroughs over and over again. But don't get me wrong, I was still obsessed with this game forever, and I would take any chance I could get to just try to experience this game in a new form. Back in 2014, I even made a freaking Facebook post talking about how exciting The Last of Us Remastered coming out on PS4 was. I mean, who the fuck actually cares about me freaking playing this on the PS4? Who freaking cares on Facebook about a random, like, 14-year-old talking about how he loves this video game? I mean, who's gonna care? My grandma? So yeah, 2018 came around, and my brother ended up getting a PlayStation 4, which was really cool for him, and obviously really cool for me. I threw him out of the way as soon as I could. I made my PlayStation account, and I ended up buying The Last of Us Remastered for about $20 on the PlayStation Store. And when I was finally first able to boot up the game, it was everything I had always wanted. It was everything that I understood from the game, but it was me actually experiencing the story, the gameplay, the graphics, the just wonderfully crafted world, the post-apocalyptic world in my hands. And so, being the loser and the nerd that I was, I ended up playing this, just about 15 times in a row. I'm serious, I wish I was exaggerating, but every single time I would just do new playthroughs. Sometimes I would just start fresh, other times I would try to make a New Game Plus file that was fully loaded up with everything upgraded, and I would even try to do sections faster and faster, which was ultimately me sort of foreshadowing my own future in which I would end up speedrunning this game, but we'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, in 2018, I just played the shit out of this game. I think, like I said, I put in 15 playthroughs and I might have played this for like 70, 80 hours total. It's kind of sad, but it was a super fun experience, and I will never forget being able to boot up this game for the first time and seeing that amazing but subtle title screen of The Last of Us. That didn't end up lasting for too much longer though, because just the next year, my family and I decided to go to Texas, and we decided to go to parts where we had never been to before. Now, because Texas is humongous, as us Texans know, you can't get through most of Texas or even certain parts of Texas in one day. Hell, you can barely get through a city in a day. So we ended up staying at hotels for quite a few nights, and my brother decided to bring his PlayStation 4 along the way so that we could end off the nights with some PlayStation action and just kind of cool down and relax for the night. It was really enjoyable, it was really fun. But one day we decided to go visit the Alamo. Now, if you haven't been to the Alamo site, which I'm sure most of you haven't, the Alamo has a public parking space close to it, but not directly in front of it. So we went to a public parking spot, paid, and then we walked to the Alamo, went through that whole experience, and ultimately we ended up getting robbed. Our car wasn't stolen, but everything inside of it was stolen, and that includes the PlayStation 4, unfortunately. Now, I'm pretty sure my brother was less devastated than I was. I feel like I was like on my knees about to break down. My brother was just kind of like, this is kind of his attitude at the time, but I was absolutely heartbroken because I knew that I would not be able to experience this game again for quite a long time. Until later that year, where my parents were gracious enough to get me a PlayStation 4 Pro. Shout out to my parents, by the way. They're the GOATs. So when I got a PlayStation 4 Pro, it was a great way to just kind of get back into gaming, but also get back into The Last of Us. And I really started thinking about new ways that I wanted to experience this game. And then January of 2020 came. So this was while I was in college, and I was pretty bored most of the time. College classes weren't that hard for me, so I had a lot of free time on my hands. And like I said, I was trying to find new ways to experience The Last of Us Remastered now that I had a PlayStation 4 Pro. And I did find one. It was through Anthony Caliber's Twitch stream. I happened to stumble upon it, and when I saw that he was speedrunning this game, I wasn't aware that speedruns were a thing. I mean, I understood that you could play games faster, but having people just compete to get the fastest time to beat a game as fast as possible, whether it's on the hardest difficulty, on the easiest difficulty, using glitches or not using glitches, this was all super new to me. But when I saw Anthony Caliber trying to beat this game in under 3 hours, or maybe it was even less at the time, I knew that I had to start watching this guy, and I did. I started watching him for the next couple months, and honestly, he is the inspiration for why I started speedrunning, why I'm in the Last of Us speedrunning community in the first place. The Last of Us has always been a lot to me, and like I said, throughout the decade, I had always tried to find new ways to experience this game, but finding Anthony Caliber and seeing him revealed to me this whole new world that I wasn't aware of hey, you can actually compete to beat this game super fast. I mean, it was awesome, and that's what I was hooked on for the next couple of months. So a couple months after I started watching him, he actually held a tournament where some normally only factions players had decided to do a speedrunning race, and I happened to just catch it. So I watched these factions players who, you know, were really good at The Last of Us multiplayer, but not that good at playing the story. Just, you know, kind of struggle, but it was still really interesting to watch. And that tournament right there, that day, that was the breaking point for me. That was the turning point in my speedrunning career, because that was the day that I said, these folks tried to speedrun despite knowing that they weren't good at it. So you know what? I've played this game a lot. I know this game inside out, and while I'm not the best at this game, I certainly know that if I put my heart and soul into it, I can speedrun, I can compete. And so it was just a few days later, or maybe a couple of weeks later, that I did my first stream, and I actually did a speedrun of The Last of Us Remastered. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but I will say that my speedruns were pretty horrible. Now, while I did have an okay time, honestly, most of my times, even now, because I've long abandoned this game, are pretty mediocre, if not bad. I mean, there's so much time save and there's so many great strats that I just refused or didn't do because, especially back in my early speedrunning days, I had a huge ego thinking that I was better than most people and that I didn't need to adopt these new fancy strategies that other runners would use. Of course, since then, I've learned that I am not the best and that I need to humble myself a little bit. But still, this experience and this journey along the way has been amazing. And now, hundreds of hours later, I still love this game to this day. And when The Last of Us Part 2 came out in June of 2020, that was a whole new experience for me too. And that game was absolutely another turning point in my speedrunning career and another turning point in my love for The Last of Us series. So yeah, The Last of Us Part 2 came out in June of 2020, and unlike most people, I actually wasn't spoiled on the story, so seeing Joel die, us playing as Abby, us beating the shit out of Ellie, and then playing as Ellie and almost killing Abby, I mean, it was a horrifying, amazing, beautiful, terrible, depressing experience. It was literally the definition of mixed emotions for sure, and I know most people don't like this game at all, especially because Joel dies. I absolutely fell in love with this game, and 3 weeks later, I decided to start testing strategies that other speedrunners had already developed for the very light category, because for me, I had always tended to be a speedrunner who focused on the easier difficulties, but would get to the game as fast as possible on the easiest difficulty. I was never really a speedrunner who focused on playing on the hardest difficulty, and while I certainly was not competitive in The Last of Us Remastered, I do feel it's fair to say that I was a hell of a lot more competitive in The Last of Us Part 2. At one point, I even ended up having about 7 different world records at the same time. It was a pretty impressive achievement. Now, of course, some of those runs and some of those categories didn't have that many other people competing, but it was still pretty cool to say at the time, and it still is a good feeling to know that I put in that much effort to have that many different world records in various different categories that all require different strategies. It was incredible, and everyone there is so supportive. Everyone there always works to find the best strats, and like I said, over 1,000 hours later, I'm so happy with the fact that I was actually able to dominate specifically the Abby percent categories. I was incredibly focused on Abby percent over Ellie percent. And so I would focus on New Game Plus, restricted and unrestricted. The differences in those categories being unrestricted allowed you to use these cheat codes like one-shot kill or unlimited ammo, unlimited supplies. Enemies won't grab you, enemies won't try to, circumvent you and try to get around you, all that sort of stuff. And restricted doesn't allow you to turn any of that on, but it's still, both categories still allow you to play on the easiest difficulty. And I was incredibly competitive in those 4 categories, and I held the world record for a long time on those 4 categories. at the same time, and I even got pretty competitive in Abby % New Game Plus Grounded. I never got down to a time where I would say I was really, really good, but I got down to a time that I would say was pretty okay, and I am so happy with the legacy I've left behind with The Last of Us Part 2. But of course, my obsession doesn't end there, because then The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered came out. Now, at that point when that was announced, I had not speedrun for a while. It has been quite a long time since I had even touched these games. My love had kind of died down. I was burnt out. I had spent over 1,000 hours on this game and hundreds of hours on The Last of Us throughout the COVID era. And as I graduated college, I thought that this chapter had closed on my life. But when The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered was announced, my love came back for it instantly, and I had this speedrunning fire in me that wanted to compete, that wanted to be the best again. And so, you know, dozens of hours later, I've practiced, and that's where the new chapter has now begun with The Last of Us series. Now that The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered is out, I am so excited to get back to speedrunning. I am so ready to be competitive, not just in these easiest difficulty categories. Oh no. Y'all already know I'm gonna be fucking competitive in those granted categories. Y'all already know I will once again be crowned the king of Abby %. I will once again dominate the Part 2 Remastered leaderboards. And once again, I want to leave a legacy behind that is monstrous, that is just fucking incredible, and that's what I'm gonna fucking do. So if you want to see that, you can check me out at twitch.tv/happy_asteroid. In the meantime, I'll catch y'all later. Peace.